It had been 8 months since I'd sat at my mother's dining table. Long enough for the weather to have changed twice. Long enough for a season of birthdays to pass without me in the room. Long enough, apparently, for someone to finally put it in writing. The group text came through on a Thursday evening. My mother's name at the top, the usual details, Sunday, her place, come Hungary. And then at the bottom, separated from the rest like she'd added it after staring at the screen for a while. And please, we'd really like to know what's going on with you. I read it twice. I noticed she'd written weed. Not I'd. Weed. I set the phone face down on the counter and ran the tap and filled a glass and stood there drinking it slowly. 8 months. No one had called to ask. No one had shown up. No one had pulled me aside at the 1 or 2 smaller things I'd attended and said anything that resembled a real question. Just the low hum of family life continuing around my absence like water moving around a stone, adjusting without acknowledging, flowing without asking why. And now a group text, with everyone copied. A single line at the bottom that was either an olive branch or an audience, and I wasn't entirely sure which. I picked the phone back up and looked at the message again. The last time I'd been in that room, 8 months ago, something had happened. Nothing loud. Nothing that left a mark you could point to. Just a moment that sat wrong and stayed wrong. In a room full of people who saw it and looked away, and me standing there understanding for the first time that the looking away wasn't accidental. I put the phone down and decided I'd go. And I decided that this time, if they asked, I was going to answer. My cousin Alicia had been engaged for 3 weeks when my aunt decided the family needed to celebrate properly. That meant my mother's house. That meant the good casserole dish, the deep one with the handles, which had been sitting in my trunk for 6 weeks because I kept forgetting to return it. That meant the holiday photo, still on the fridge from December, 8 people crowded into the frame, everyone smiling in the specific way families smile when someone's holding a camera. I parked in the same spot I always parked, second from the end, out of habit more than anything else. It felt like every other gathering. That's the part worth saying. Uncle Reese was already there when I arrived. He was always already there. Loud in the way that fills a room before you've taken your jacket off. Generous in the way that makes you feel briefly chosen. The kind of man whose name every cousin says first when someone asks who to call. He'd brought 2 bottles of something expensive and was telling a story in the living room that had 4 people laughing before I'd even put my keys down. I was in the kitchen about an hour in, helping clear the first round of plates when I heard it. I didn't catch all of it, just the tail end. Something about how my sister was looking good, something about the dress, something that bent slightly in a direction it had no business bending. My sister's name is Janelle. She's 7 years younger than me, and she has a way of going very still when she doesn't know what to do with something, and that's what she did. She went still. Reese put his hand on her shoulder. It didn't move. He laughed, the kind of laugh that's really an instruction. An invitation for everyone watching to decide it was nothing, to smile along, to make the moment smaller than it was by agreeing it was fine. I looked across the kitchen. There were 3 other adults in that room. I watched all 3 of them register it. I saw it land on their faces, just for a second, just a flicker, and then I watched each of them turn back to what they were doing. One of them reached for the serving spoon. One of them said something to the person next to her. One of them walked out of the room entirely. Janelle excused herself. I set down the plates and followed her into the hallway. She was standing near the coat rack, not doing anything, just standing there with her arms folded loosely. "You okay?" I said. "Yeah," she said. "I'm fine." I didn't say anything. She looked at me. "Please don't make it a thing tonight." "Okay," I said. "I mean it," she said. "Just leave it." "Okay," I said again. We stood there for another second, and then she went back toward the living room, and I stayed in the hallway a moment longer. Neither of us was okay. We both knew it. We just agreed, the way families sometimes do, to carry it quietly back into the room and set it down somewhere out of sight. I went back to the kitchen and finished clearing the plates. 3 other adults had been standing in that room. None of them were in the hallway. None of them had followed anyone anywhere. That was the last family gathering I attended for 8 months. The engagement party wasn't the first time. That was the thing I kept coming back to in the days after. Not just what happened in the kitchen, but the fact that I'd seen versions of it before and let them exist in that soft category of things the family didn't name out loud. There was a comment Reese made about my cousin Dana's dress at her graduation. Dana was 16, and what he said wasn't subtle, and 3 adults heard it, and the one who responded did it by laughing slightly and steering the conversation somewhere else. There was a birthday 3 years back, one of the kids' parties, where I watched his hand land too low on my niece Maya's back when he hugged her goodbye, and I stood there doing the same math everyone else was doing. Was it an accident? Is it worth the moment it would take? Is this the right time? And by the time I'd finished the math, he was already across the room. And there was Marisol's 16th. A joke Reese made at the table that I still remember word for word. My mother shut it down, not by naming it, not by saying anything direct, but by asking loudly if anyone wanted more bread and letting the noise of the table swallow it. Reese smiled and moved on. Marisol looked at her plate. I'd filed all of it in the place where families file things they've decided not to hold. 2 days after the engagement party, I called Marisol. She picked up and we talked around it for a few minutes the way you do, and then I stopped and asked her plainly. I said I want to know if Reese had done things like that before. Not just recently. Before. She was quiet for a long time. Yeah, she said. Since I was 12. I didn't say anything. I tried to say something once, she said. To Mom. When I was maybe 14. Another pause. She told me I was being dramatic. That Reese was just affectionate and I was reading into it. She said that. She said that. Marisol said. So I stopped saying anything. It was easier. I told her I believed her. I said it plainly, so she'd know I meant it and wasn't just moving past it. She said thanks in a way that told me she hadn't heard it often enough. I told her I wasn't going back to family events. Not until something changed. I didn't know exactly what that change looked like yet, but I knew I was done walking into rooms where what had happened in that kitchen was the kind of thing that got handled by reaching for the serving spoon. She got quiet again. Don't make it about me, she said. If this becomes a whole thing, I don't want my name in the middle of it. I won't put your name anywhere, I said. Promise me. I promise, I said. But I'm not going to keep pretending either. She didn't argue with that. We stayed on the line for another minute without saying much, and then she said she had to get back to studying, and I said okay, and we hung up. I sat with the call for a long time after, because there's a difference between suspecting something for years and having someone you love confirm it quietly on a Thursday afternoon, like it's a fact they've simply been living with. Like it was never really a question. Like the only question was whether anyone was ever going to ask. The family would notice I wasn't showing up. That part one was sure of. What I didn't know yet was whether they'd notice the absence or just the inconvenience of it. A month and I drove to my mother's house on a Tuesday afternoon. I picked Tuesday deliberately. No gathering, no occasion, no other cars in the driveway. Just her. I'd thought about what I wanted to say for long enough that I'd worn the edges off it. And I sat in the car for a minute before I went in and told myself to just say it plainly. She was in the kitchen when I came in, same as always, and she smiled when she saw me like my showing up on a random Tuesday was the most natural thing. She made coffee I didn't ask for and set it in front of me and sat down across the table and said it was good to see me. I told her there was something I needed to bring up. I asked her to just listen before she said anything. She folded her hands on the table. I took that as a yes. I told her what I saw in the kitchen at the engagement party. I told her about the comment and the shoulder and the laugh that was really an instruction. I kept it specific because I knew that vague would give her somewhere to go. I said Reese's name. I said Marisol's name. I told her what I saw, and I told her I'd followed Marisol into the hallway afterward. I got maybe 90 seconds in before she cut me off. Reese has had a very hard year, she said. Her voice was soft in the specific way that means the conversation is being managed, not had. He's going through things. You know that. That's not what I'm talking about, I said. And you know how he is, she said. He's always been a lot. He doesn't always read the room. That doesn't mean. Mom, he's family, she said. He's been part of this family for 50 years, and I am not going to sit here and let you. She stopped. Reset. Softer again. I just think you might be misunderstanding what you saw. You were across the kitchen. These things can look different depending on where you're standing. I looked at her. Bringing this up, making into something, it would blow the family apart, she said. For nothing. For a moment at a party that you saw from across the room. I didn't say what I was thinking. I didn't tell her about the phone call with Marisol, or what Marisol had said about being 14 and trying once and being told she was dramatic. I had promised Marisol her name would stay out of it, and I kept that promise. I just sat there and let my mother finish. When she was done, the kitchen was quiet, and the coffee was in front of me, and I hadn't touched it. I pushed back the chair and said okay, and picked up my keys. Are you leaving? She said. Yeah, I said. We're not done talking. I think we are, I said. I drove out of the driveway and sat there in the car with the engine running. Not for long. Just long enough to confirm what I already knew, which was that this conversation had gone exactly the way Marisol had told me it would go, the way she'd learned it would go when she was 14 years old and tried to say something to the same woman I'd just driven 20 minutes to speak to. I picked up my phone and typed, I tried. It went how you said it would. Her reply came back in under a minute. A single heart. Nothing else. I put the car in drive and went home. If my mother wouldn't hear it, I didn't know who in that family ever could. But I was done walking through the door and pretending I hadn't tried. Easter came and went without me. My mother sent a group text with the details, time, what to bring, who was handling dessert, and I sent back a short line saying I couldn't make it and hoped everyone had a good one. No one replied directly. The thread moved on around my message like it hadn't landed. The baby shower was a month after that. A cousin of mine, one of the younger ones, was 7 months along, and the family had organized something at my aunt's place. I sent a gift card and a short note, and declined the invitation with the same kind of line I'd been using. Warm enough not to be rude, short enough not to invite follow-up. Father's Day. Same. 3 months of it. 3 months of invitations, arriving and short, polite, responses going back, and the conversation never once going deeper than the surface. At some point, my mother stopped including me in the planning texts. Not announced, just quietly dropped from the thread. I noticed and didn't say anything about it. Then Theo called. Theo was my cousin on my mother's side, mid-30s, an attorney, the kind of man who watches a room more than he talks in it. We'd always had an easy rapport, the kind built on years of standing near each other at family events and making the same quiet observations without needing to compare notes afterward. He wasn't a man who called without a reason. You doing all right? He said. I mean with the family stuff. I'm taking some time, I said. From the whole thing or from something specific? From the whole thing, I said. There was a pause on his end. Not long. Just enough to tell me he was deciding how far to take it. Okay, he said. I think I get it. He didn't ask me to explain, and I didn't offer to. We talked for a few more minutes about other things, and then he said he'd check in again soon, and we hung up. A week later, he called back. He didn't open with small talk this time. He said he thought I should know what was being said at gatherings. That Reese had started making comments. Nothing direct. Reese was never direct when indirect was available, but consistent. Calling me sensitive. Suggesting I'd had some kind of falling out over a money situation that didn't exist. Making the kind of jokes that aren't really jokes, the kind designed to give a room permission to dismiss someone without having to say why. And nobody's saying anything, I said. It wasn't really a question. No, Theo said. Nobody's correcting it. I thanked him for telling me, and he said of course, and that was that. I sat with it after the call. Not with anger. I moved past anger somewhere around month 2. More with a kind of cold clarity about how these things work. About the efficiency of it. Reese had been given the room, same as always, and he'd used it the same way he always used every room he was handed without question. And the family that had always looked away from what he did was now, without any apparent difficulty, looking straight at a version of me that he'd invented. A story about a man was being told in rooms he wasn't in, and every week that passed without him there to answer it, the story got a little more settled. Marisol called on a Sunday evening 6 months in. I could tell from the first word she said. Not crying the way people cry when something just happened. Crying the way people cry when they've been holding something for hours and finally stopped trying. She'd gone to a small family lunch. Not a big event, just a few people in my aunt's place, the kind of low-key thing that doesn't make it into the group texts. She went because she'd been trying to keep things normal, she said, because she didn't want her absence to become its own conversation. Reese was there, and at some point in the afternoon, she ended up in the kitchen, and he was already in there, and the door was mostly closed, and it happened again. Another comment. Another moment where his hand was somewhere it had no right to be, and the laugh that followed was designed to make it smaller than it was. And while she was still standing there, her mother walked in. My mother. She came through the kitchen door, and she saw it. Marisol told me she made eye contact with her. Actual eye contact. And then my mother turned around and walked back out. The kitchen went quiet, and Reese said something light and moved past her, and Marisol stood there alone. I didn't say anything for a moment. She saw it, Marisol said. She looked right at me, and she left. I still didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that would land right. She told me she was done. She'd found a friend across the state with a spare room, and she was moving in 2 weeks. She wasn't coming to gatherings anymore. She wasn't answering the group texts. She was just going to go and let the family adjust to it the same way they adjusted to everything, by flowing around it and not asking why. Then she asked me the question, "Has any of this actually changed anything?" she said. "Your whole taking time thing. 6 months of not showing up. Has it done anything? Or has it just made you feel better about yourself?" I started to answer and stopped. Because from where I'm standing, she said, "Nothing is different. Reese is still there. Mom is still covering for him. And now I'm the one moving across the state, and you're the one who's been sitting out for 6 months, and the only thing that's actually changed is that you're not in the room." She wasn't wrong. That was the thing that kept me up until 2 in the morning after we got off the phone. I told myself the absence meant something. That staying away was a position, a line drawn, a thing the family would eventually have to reckon with. But Marisol had just told me what it actually looked like from the inside. And what it looked like was a man who'd quietly removed himself and let everything continue without even the friction of his presence. The family had read 8 months of silence as a phase, a mood, something he'd get over and come back from, and we'd all move on. My mother had stopped including me in texts. Reese had filled the space with a story about money and sensitivity, and everyone had nodded along because there was no one there to say otherwise. Quiet absence, I realized somewhere around 2 in the morning, only means something if someone is listening for it. I hadn't made a stance. I made a gap. And the only way the silence was ever going to mean anything was if I was willing to finally break it. The group text came through on a Thursday evening 2 months after Marisol moved. Same format as always. My mother's name at the top. Sunday, her place come hungry. And at the bottom, added after a space like she'd written it separately. And please, we'd really like to know what's going on with you. I read it twice. Then I typed 2 words and sent them before I could talk myself into something longer. "I'll be there." I put the phone down and sat with that for a minute, not second-guessing it, just feeling the weight of what I just agreed to walk into. Then I picked the phone back up and called Marisol. She answered on the 3rd ring, and I told her I was going to Sunday dinner. I told her I was going to answer the question honestly, what I saw, what I did about it, why I left. I told her I wouldn't use her name, wouldn't reference her story, wouldn't put anything on her that she hadn't chosen to put there herself. I would only speak to what I'd seen with my own eyes in that kitchen at the engagement party and what happened when I tried to address it. She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not asking you to do this," she said. "I know," I said. "And I'm not asking you not to," she said. We stayed on the line for another few seconds, and then she said she hoped it went the way it needed to go, and I said I'd let her know, and we hung up. I called Theo next. I told him the same thing. Sunday dinner, I was planning to answer the question directly when it came up. I told him I wasn't calling to recruit him into anything. I just thought he should know before he walked into the room. He listened to all of it without interrupting. "I'll be there," he said. "You don't have to do anything," I said. "I know," he said. But I'm not going to sit there and pretend I don't remember things I remember. If it comes up and someone tries to rewrite it, I'm not going to perform amnesia for Reese's benefit. A pause. I'm done doing that. It was the first time anyone in my family had said something like that out loud to me. Not implied it, not hinted at it, not given me a look across a room that meant something neither of us was willing to say. Said it plainly on a phone call where it could be heard. I thanked him, and he said there was nothing to thank him for, and we hung up. Subscribe if any of this sounds familiar. I sat in my apartment that evening and thought about the room I was about to walk back into. My mother at the head of the table. Reese somewhere near the middle, easy and loud, the same as always. Cousins, aunts, the low hum of the family that had spent 8 months flowing around my absence without once asking the real question. Sunday was 2 days away, and I still didn't know, when the moment came, who in that room would still be sitting beside me after I answered. I got there early enough to help carry dishes in from the kitchen. 12 people at that table by the time everyone sat down. My mother at the head. Reese 2 seats to her left, already in the middle of something, already holding the room the way he always held the room. He nodded at me when I sat down like we'd seen each other last week. Like the 8 months were a minor weather event that had simply passed. I ate. I listened. I made the small talk that the table required, and I watched the room move around me the way it always had, easy and practiced, everyone in their place. At some point during the main course, Reese told a story. It was angled, not at me directly, never directly, but shaped in a way that positioned him as the reasonable one and me as the family's current difficulty. Something about people who take things personally and make everyone else manage their feelings. He told it well. He always told things well. A few people smiled. No one pushed back. I kept eating. Over coffee, my mother turned to me. She'd been building to it all evening. I could feel it, and now the table was quiet enough, and she had her moment. She asked me, gently, in front of everyone, why I'd stopped coming around. What was going on with me? Whether everything was okay. Her voice was warm. It was the voice she used when she wanted a conversation to look like care and function like control. I set my coffee cup down. I'll tell you, I said. I'll tell all of you. The table went a degree quieter. I told them about the engagement party. The kitchen. I named what Reese said to my sister. Not her name, just the comment, just the specific shape of it, enough that anyone who had been standing in that room would recognize it immediately. I described the hand on the shoulder. I described the laugh that came after it. I said there were 3 other adults in that kitchen who saw it happen, and I named what each of them did next. The one who reached for the serving spoon, the one who started a new conversation, the one who walked out of the room. I didn't raise my voice once. Reese laughed. One short sound. Brother, he said, you're describing a hug. You're sitting here at your mother's table, describing a man hugging his niece. That's not what I described, I said. You were across the kitchen, he said. You saw what you wanted to see. I was across the kitchen, I said. I saw what was there. My mother put her hand flat on the table. This isn't the place for this. Theo's voice came from the other end of the table. Quiet, unhurried. It's exactly the place, he said. The room shifted, not loudly, just the particular silence of people recalibrating. Theo looked at the table, not at Reese. I saw it too, at the engagement party, and I've seen things like it before that. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. One of my aunts, she'd been at the engagement party, she'd been in the kitchen, she'd been the one who started a new conversation, put her fork down on the edge of her plate. She didn't pick it up again. Reese started to say something and stopped. My mother looked at me the way she'd looked at me across the table my whole life when she wanted me to be the one to make something easier. I didn't make it easier. You asked me why I stopped coming, I said. That's why. I watched something happen in this family's kitchen, and I watched this family decide not to see it. And then I came to you, and you told me I was misunderstanding what I saw. And then I kept not coming, and nobody asked a real question for 8 months. I looked around the table. The reason surprised everyone except me. Because everyone except me had a reason not to look. The table was quiet. Reese didn't laugh again. and 12 people sat with what had just been said in a room where, for years, nothing like it had ever been said at all. My mother called the next morning at 8:45. I let it ring twice and then picked up because I knew that not picking up would become its own conversation. She didn't open with, "How are you?" She opened with, "I want to talk about last night," in the voice that meant she'd been awake preparing this. She said I had ambushed Reese. That word specifically, ambushed. She said I had chosen a family dinner with 12 people present to air something that should have been handled privately, that I had embarrassed him in front of people who loved him, and that the least I could do was call him and apologize for the way I'd chosen to bring it up. "I'm not going to do that," I said. "I'm not asking you to say you were wrong about what you saw," she said, pivoting quickly, which told me she'd anticipated that answer. "I'm asking you to acknowledge that the way you did it was hurtful. You asked me publicly," I said, "at a table with 12 people. I answer the question you asked. That's not. You asked me in front of everyone," I said. "I answer in front of everyone. Those are the same thing." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said that Reese was family, and that family worked things out privately, and that she hoped I would think about the damage I was doing to relationships that had taken decades to build. I told her I'd think about it. I didn't call Reese. By that afternoon, 2 of my aunts had called separately. Neither of them had been in the kitchen at the engagement party, but both of them had been at that table the night before. The first one said she was glad someone had finally said it out loud, and that she'd had her own quiet reasons for keeping her distance from Reese at gatherings for years. The second one was more careful. She said she believed me. She said she wasn't sure what to do with it. She said she was sorry it had taken this long for anyone to ask me directly. An uncle I wasn't particularly close to sent a text that said he was taking Reese's side until he heard more. I read it and put the phone down and didn't respond. Theo sent me a long message that evening. He'd written out 2 specific incidents he'd witnessed over the years, neither of them involving Marisol, both of them detailed enough that I understood immediately why he'd stayed quiet about them for as long as he had, and why staying quiet had cost him something. At the bottom, he said he was sending the same message to my mother. She didn't reply to him for 3 days. On the second day after the dinner, the intercom at my building buzzed at 7 in the evening. The front desk told me there was someone asking for me who didn't have an appointment. I asked for the name, and they told me it was Reese. I told them not to send him up. He didn't leave right away. He stood in the lobby for 20 minutes, according to the front desk, and then he left a voicemail before he went. I listened to it once. It moved in 3 directions across 4 minutes. Offended, then explanatory, then something that bent toward pleading without quite getting there. He said he didn't understand why I was doing this to the family. He said he'd always been good to me. He said he deserved a chance to talk like men. I saved the voicemail and set the phone down. The family was rearranging itself. That much was clear. Phone calls were being made, positions were being taken, people were deciding which version of the story they were going to hold on to. Some of them were glad something had been said. Some of them were more interested in managing the disruption than examining the cause of it. And Reese was standing in lobbies and leaving voicemails and waiting to see if the center would hold the way it always had. I didn't know yet whether this was the beginning of something actually changing or just the family finding a new way to arrange itself around the same protected middle. But I knew which calls I was returning and which ones I wasn't. That part, at least, was simple. 3 months later, I was at Theo's house on a Saturday evening. Marisol was there. 2 of my aunts, the ones who'd called after the dinner. 3 cousins, Theo's wife, and their kids moving in and out of the kitchen the way kids do at the end of a long day. Somebody had brought too much food, and somebody else had brought a bottle nobody ended up opening, and we ate at Theo's big table until the food was gone, and then we kept sitting there. Nobody called it a family dinner. Nobody said it was a replacement for anything. It just happened because Theo had made a few calls and people had said yes, and then the following month it happened again, and then again after that. No group text from my mother. No occasion. No Reese. Just people who had decided, without making a formal announcement about it, that they wanted to be in the same room. After dinner, Marisol and I ended up on the porch. It was cool enough to need a jacket, and neither of us had one, so we just stood there with our arms folded and watched the street. She told me she'd filed a formal statement. Not with the police, with a counselor through a program someone had told her about, on her own terms, at a time of her own choosing. She said nobody had pushed her toward it. She hadn't done it because of the dinner or because of anything I'd said or done. She'd done it because somewhere in the last few months something had shifted for her, and she'd finally felt like she could. "I'm proud of you," I said. She nodded once. "I know." We stayed on the porch for another few minutes, and then went back inside, and that was all either of us needed to say about it. My mother called on a Wednesday afternoon about 2 weeks after Theo's. She didn't apologize. I hadn't expected her to. Not yet, maybe not for a long time, maybe in a form I wouldn't fully recognize when it came. But she asked, carefully, whether she could come over sometime. Just to talk. Her voice was quieter than usual. Not the managed softness she used to end conversations. Something smaller than that. I told her yes. Sometime. Not yet. She said okay, and we hung up, and I set the phone down on the counter and stood in my apartment in the quiet of a Wednesday afternoon with nowhere I needed to be and no one I was waiting to hear from. I wasn't angry. I wasn't satisfied in the way I'd imagined I might be when I used to think about how this would eventually resolve. I was just standing in my kitchen, alone, not carrying anything I hadn't chosen to carry. For a long time, I've been waiting for my family to catch up to something I could already see clearly. I didn't realize how much of my energy that waiting had taken until I finally stopped. I wasn't waiting anymore. I spent 8 months being quiet, and it didn't move anything. The thing that moved something was walking back into the room and saying plainly what I'd seen. Some people were ready to hear it. Some weren't. I stopped needing everyone to be ready at the same time. I'm over it where silence ends. If you've ever stayed silent in a family situation longer than you should have, what finally made you say something?